I'm Sam Johnson. This is Reece. We've been married about, 2.5 years now. We're both from South Carolina, and we train martial arts. I've trained for about 15 years now, primarily in Shuri-Ryu, which is an Okinawan karate-do. I've also done a little bit of Danjan Jiu-Jitsu, traditional Okinawan Kabuto, which is weapons training, and Garma Arnis, which is a Filipino sword fighting style.
So I've been training for not as long. I've been training for about 8 years, going on 9. And I've done a lot of Garma Arnis. I would say that's like my base style. It's Filipino fencing. And it has a lot of other things that it's mixed in with it. So I've also done some Danzanryu Jiu-Jitsu, and I tapped a little bit into the karate. So martial arts is more like a lifestyle for me than anything else. When I was young, I always wanted to learn, how to defend the people around me.
I started training very young. I think I was 12 at the time. It was honestly something my older brother had the most interest in, and I just kind of tagged along at first.
We've learned a lot over the years about martial arts and different ways of fighting and how different people fight. And here's 5 things that drive me crazy when I read a book. So the first one is unflavored fight scenes. There's just sometimes, when a character is supposed to know what they're doing, but it's just he punched and she blocked. And it's okay, well, that was really boring. If he knows what he's doing, what style is he coming from? Is he softer, like jiu-jitsu? Is he going to use more when somebody brings energy at him, is he sending the energy back? He punched, so they countered. Or, is it more like a karate style where, the antagonist comes in and he goes straight for the jugular, just tries to break an arm immediately. And when that isn't in a book, it gets very boring to read. So if somebody could get more flavorful fighting scenes or styles in their characters pretty easily nowadays on the internet. There's a lot of YouTube, and you can pretty easily find on Google what's a legit system and what's not. So if you're trying to go with a softer style, you can look up the jiu-jitsus, judos, even aikido. If you want a harder thing, look up a good karate, not just your Mick karate down the street, find something that's traditional and that actually has theory and philosophy and principle behind it.
So a second thing that is frustrating to come across in books or media in general is the idea that a conflict between 2 master fighters is going to be extremely prolonged. There's this idea, and it's probably partly for dramatic effect, that when 2 masters clash, they will fight from sunrise till sunset. The reality is they will fight until one of them makes the first mistake. At that point, the fight's going to be over. Typically, this is probably going to be 2 to 10 seconds. There's a legend about samurai that was any duel between 2 master samurai had 3 or less movements and only lasted up to 5 seconds, because the moment someone slipped up, there was an opening that was exploited. A couple thoughts on how to maintain that reality and still have dramatic effect in cinema. One is add other stakes to the fight. If it's just 2 people going at each other trying to take each other out, it will probably end very quickly. But what if they, for whatever reason, can't take each other out? They're trying to not use lethal force. There's someone they're trying to protect, or they're trying to show an example for a younger student who's watching. In a straight-up conflict, it's probably going to be very short, but there's a lot of other things that could be going on to influence the conflict that would change the stakes and change how they might approach the engagement.
So the third thing that kind of drives me crazy is really cliche terms, like a karate chop, right? It's there's a place for that, but there's better words. You can use like a knife hand or the blade edge of the hand, something like that. Whereas a lot of times it's just like, he, used a karate chop, or he did like a roundhouse kick. And it's just like little terms that are really common in culture to know, but like, why would they use it? Or why would you use it like that? Would the character call it that? Things like that.
So another thing which can be inaccurate or frustrating to come across in books and media is the amount of damage and beating a person can take before getting out. The human body is simultaneously very strong and very weak. It's built to take force and damage in certain directions and places. For example, pretty much all of your internal organs have about 2 inches of cushioning. So blows to the center mass, it takes a lot before that's actually going to cause substantial damage to someone, unless the attacker is very, very well trained and knows how to bypass that cushioning. But something you'll see is like someone gets kicked in the temple at very high power. That's a knockout strike immediately. You don't get back up from that and just walk away. So it's important to think through in a conflict scene what kind of damage, internal and external, is going to be inflicted by a blow or by something happening, by a lock, by a break. We need to make sure that if someone uses a wrist lock, is it a controlling lock? Okay. Then the person who it was applied on can walk away and still use that arm. If it was a break, which is fairly easy to do once you have the lock in place, that wrist is then out of commission for the rest of the scene, possibly the character's life, depending on the level of healing or medicine available.
Okay, so the fifth and last thing that we thought about when asked this question about, like, what's frustrating when you're reading, writing, or movies or whatever, was like unrealistic movements. There's certain movements that's like, there's no reason that would be done in that way, or that doesn't make sense. You can't go from a low spinning sweep to like immediately punching the head. Like it doesn't work that quickly unless you describe a movement between that gets you from the bottom to the top without getting hit.
Just to add and expound on that a little bit, all of martial arts is ultimately reliant on physics and how energy flows, how motion works, momentum, and the manipulation of it. So, for example, jury practitioners, when we're punching, we're actually trying to draw energy by pushing off of the ground, turning our bodies and channeling that energy through a punch. It's physics-based. A lot of fighting techniques you'll see in cinema, particularly in like the action genre, or sometimes in books, are very, very exaggerated for dramatic effect, but completely unrealistic. Like, physics does not work that way. I'm trying to think of a specific example in blanking.
The Superman punch.
The Superman punch. Yeah, punching forward like this, you've just disconnected all of your major muscle groups from your arm, and you're hitting with just your shoulder, which has no real force behind it.
Yeah, hitting anything midair.
Yeah. If you're not on the ground, whenever you hit something, half of your momentum is going into what you hit. The other half is going right backwards because you have no way to ground yourself and keep it going forward. So there's a few terms that might be helpful to know and think about when writing fight scenes or martial arts in general. One that's kind of a pet peeve in mine for me, if you've seen the weapon that's 2 bars of wood, string in the middle, you've almost certainly heard it called a nunchuck. That's American slang. No practitioner of the weapon is ever going to call it that. It's either nunjakun or nunchaku are the actual traditional names for the weapon.
Another one is the karate chop, which we talked about a little earlier. Everybody knows what a karate chop is, but it's a kind of childish term. Usually if we're using something like that, we're going to call it either a knife hand, a shito, which is the Japanese term, or like striking with the blade of the hand.
So another technique that might have a term you're not familiar with can be called the corkscrew punch. So this is another English name for, in Japanese, the seikenzuki, which is the full turn punch. You pull all the way back to your hip. You extend it out, rotating with the wrist with the corkscrew motion. One of the reasons that turns is helpful is because it's helps people visualize pretty quickly that rotating motion, which is one of the key factors in that punch.
So in writing, when you're describing a kick, sometimes it's really hard to visualize, even as a writer, I know. So what we want to visualize is where the striking surface is. You know, is he throwing a kick from the ball of his foot where he's hitting like here? Is he like unskilled or like a soccer player and hitting with the top of the foot? Or is he even using the blade of his shin to try to do a lock or some damage with that, or just isn't skilled? So those are some things to keep in mind with kicks.
So I just want to say thank you to the company for having us out and letting us share some of our experience, have a good time with the students here, and just an encouragement to all of you out there who are watching this later. There is a lot of resources you can find to research these things. The internet is a fantastic tool. Take some time, do some digging, find some videos of various styles. I'll be entirely honest, the Wikipedia for Shuri was surprisingly accurate. But I hope something we've shared today has been helpful for you. I hope that you're able to take some of this and run with it to improve your writing.